The sound of splintering wood echoed across the frozen valley at 3 a.m. Another cabin roof had collapsed under the weight of ice and snow. Inside, the Morrison family scrambled in darkness as 12 tons of frozen timber crushed their beds, their stove, everything they owned. They escaped through a window into 40 below air, running through waist-deep snow toward the only light they could see, the warm glow coming from what looked like a massive snowdrift 100 yards away. That snowdrift was Olaf Bjornsson's snow cave, and inside that cave, carved from compacted snow and ice, the temperature was 70 degrees Fahrenheit. A small fire burned in a stone-lined pit. The walls glowed with warm candlelight filtering through translucent ice. A thermometer hanging from the curved ceiling read exactly 70 degrees, while the world outside tried to kill everything in it at 42 below zero. The Morrisons stumbled through the entrance tunnel, crawling on hands and knees through the low passage, and emerged into warmth so sudden it felt like hallucination. Olaf looked up from where he sat mending a fur, unsurprised. "Roof collapsed, yeah?" Morrison nodded, too shocked to speak. His wife was crying, from relief, from cold, from the realization that they'd nearly died while this Norwegian sat in his ridiculous snow cave warmer than they'd been in their log cabin, even with the fire roaring. By the end of February 1888, 9 cabins in the Yukon Valley had collapsed from snow load, structural failure, or both. 13 people had frozen to death in structures that were supposed to protect them. Every single cabin that survived was damaged. Cracked logs, failed chinking, warped doors, roofs sagging under impossible weight. Olaf's snow cave stood perfect, the structure that trappers had mocked as suicide, as the stupidest shelter ever built, as a death trap made from the very element trying to kill them. That cave stayed at 70 degrees through the worst winter the Yukon had seen in 50 years, and it saved every person who'd mocked it. Olaf Bjornsson was 48 years old when he arrived in the Yukon Territory in the spring of 1887, chasing gold and opportunity like thousands of others. But unlike the Americans, Canadians, and Europeans flooding north, Olaf came from Svalbard, an Arctic archipelago where winter meant 4 months of total darkness and temperatures that made the Yukon seem mild. In Svalbard, Olaf had learned something that gold seekers from temperate climates couldn't comprehend. Snow wasn't just cold and deadly. Snow was building material. Snow was insulation. Snow, properly shaped and compacted, created shelters warmer than any cabin when you understood the physics. The Inuit had known this for millennia, building igloos that stayed warm with nothing but body heat and small seal oil lamps. Norwegian Arctic hunters had learned similar techniques, creating snow caves for emergency shelter that could mean the difference between death and survival. Olaf had spent winters in such caves and understood exactly how they worked. When he arrived in the Yukon and saw how miners and trappers were building log cabins with massive fireplaces, burning through forests of wood trying to stay warm, he knew immediately they were doing it wrong. They were building with materials that conducted cold, that cracked in extreme temperatures, that required constant fuel to maintain temperature. They were fighting winter instead of using it. Olaf would build differently. He would build from snow itself, creating a dome that used the properties of frozen water to insulate rather than conduct, to store heat rather than lose it, to work with physics instead of fighting against them. His neighbors thought he'd lost his mind when he started construction in November. Olaf began his snow cave in early November 1887, as soon as the snowpack was deep enough and consolidated enough to work with. He chose a location with a slight slope, critical for drainage and entrance design. The site was near his claim, but positioned for wind protection and sun exposure. The first trapper to see what Olaf was doing was Tom Henderson, whose claim was adjacent to Olaf's. Henderson watched Olaf digging into a snowbank, piling snow into blocks, and shaping them into what looked like a dome. "You building a snow fort?" Henderson asked. "Building shelter," Olaf replied. "Snow cave for winter." Henderson stared at him. "A snow cave to live in?" "Yeah, is best shelter in extreme cold, warmer than cabin, uses no wood, cannot burn down, cannot collapse from snow weight. It's made of snow. Snow is cold. You'll freeze to death sleeping in frozen water. Snow is insulator when properly made. Inside will be warm. You will see." Henderson shook his head. "That's the craziest thing I've heard. You can't live in snow. It'll melt from your body heat, then refreeze and trap you, or it'll collapse and bury you, or you'll just freeze because it's made of ice. Have built many snow caves in Svalbard. Know how to make them safe and warm. This is proven technique. Proven where? The Arctic? This isn't the Arctic. Yukon winter is Arctic winter. Same physics apply. Henderson rode away, convinced the Norwegian had gone insane. Building a house from snow. Absolutely ridiculous. But Olaf continued working with methodical precision. His technique was specific and refined through years of Arctic experience. He started by stomping down snow in a circular area about 12 feet in diameter, compacting the base layer to create a firm foundation. Then he began cutting blocks from consolidated snowpack. Not fresh, fluffy snow, but snow that had been on the ground for weeks, compressed by its own weight, transformed into dense material that held shape when cut. Each block was roughly 18 inches long, 12 inches tall, and 8 inches thick. Olaf cut them with a long knife, then transported them to his building site. The snow needed to be right consistency, not too powdery, not too icy. The temperature needed to be right, below 15 degrees Fahrenheit for best results. He laid the first course of blocks in a circle about 10 feet in diameter, but instead of building straight up, Olaf carved each block at a slight angle, leaning inward. This lean was critical. It would create the dome shape that made snow caves self-supporting. As he built upward in a continuous spiral, the lean increased gradually. Each block was tilted more than the one below it, creating a smooth, upward curve. The blocks bonded to each other through simple pressure and cold. When you press snow blocks together in below freezing temperatures, they freeze together at the contact points within minutes. Henderson returned a few days later with 3 other trappers to watch the construction. By then, Olaf had built the walls 5 feet high, and the inward lean was obvious. The structure was taking shape as a dome. "That's going to collapse," one trapper said confidently. "You can't build a roof out of snow blocks. They'll fall inward. Dome shape is self-supporting," Olaf explained. "Each block leans against blocks around it. Weight pushes outward and downward, not inward. Is same principle as stone arch. Very strong." "Stone arch, I understand. Snow arch seems insane." "Snow can be very strong when compacted and shaped correctly. This dome will support several tons of additional snow on top." The trappers laughed. They figured they'd return in a week to find a collapsed pile of snow and a frozen Norwegian. But the dome held. Olaf built it up course by course until he was working at the apex, reaching up to place the final blocks that would close the top. The final keystone block was the trickiest. It had to be slightly larger than the hole it filled, so it would wedge in place rather than falling through. Olaf carved it precisely, lifted it carefully, and pressed it into position. The dome was complete. 10 feet interior diameter, about 7 feet tall at the center. The walls were approximately 2 feet thick, 24 inches of compacted snow between the interior and exterior. But Olaf wasn't finished. He began the critical process of finishing the interior. Olaf lit a small fire inside the completed dome, just a few pieces of wood, a modest flame. The heat from the fire warmed the interior air to just above freezing. This warmth caused the innermost layer of snow on the walls and ceiling to melt slightly, just the surface, penetrating perhaps a quarter-inch deep. Then Olaf extinguished the fire and opened the ventilation hole he'd cut at the dome's apex. Cold air flowed in, and the melted snow layer froze again, but now it froze as ice, smooth, hard, and crucially, sealed. This ice layer created a vapor barrier that would prevent warm interior air from sublimating the snow structure from the inside. This glazing technique was essential. Without it, warm, moist air would gradually evaporate the interior snow, weakening the structure. With the ice glaze, the dome became stable. The interior ice layer protected the snow structure behind it. Olaf repeated this process twice more, each time creating a thin layer of ice on the interior surface. When finished, the interior walls were smooth, slightly glossy, and rock-hard. You could press on them without making a dent. Next came the entrance tunnel. Olaf excavated a tunnel starting outside the dome, angling slightly upward as it penetrated the wall, then opening into the interior space at floor level. The tunnel was about 12 feet long, just large enough to crawl through on hands and knees. And critically, it entered below the level of the main chamber floor. This below-floor level entrance was crucial for heat retention. Cold air sinks. With the entrance below the living floor, cold air would flow down the tunnel and out, while warm air stayed trapped in the dome above. This natural air circulation created a thermal barrier more effective than any door. Inside the dome, Olaf built a raised sleeping platform from snow blocks, about 2 feet above the entrance level. This platform put him in the warmest air layer, well above where cold air settled. He built a small stone-lined fire pit near the center of the floor, not for constant burning, but for occasional heating and cooking. The pit stones would absorb heat and radiate it long after the fire died. Finally, the ventilation, a 4-inch diameter hole at the dome's apex covered with a removable snow plug. This hole allowed air circulation, preventing carbon dioxide buildup if fires were burned inside. But it was small enough that heat loss was minimal. When Henderson and the other trappers saw the finished snow cave, their mockery intensified. The structure was invisible from a distance, just a white mound in a white landscape. Up close, it looked like a snowdrift with a small dark hole at the base. "You're really going to sleep in there?" Henderson asked. "Yeah, it's ready now. Very warm inside. It's made of snow. Snow is frozen water. Frozen water is cold. How can it possibly be warm?" Olaf tried to explain. "Snow is insulator, is full of trapped air. Air is very good insulator when cannot move. 2 feet of snow stops heat loss better than 1 foot of wood. Also, snow does not conduct cold. It prevents heat from leaving." "That makes no sense. Cabin has gaps, has airflow, loses heat constantly. Snow cave is sealed, has no gaps, loses very little heat. Small fire heats cave easily. Body heat alone can keep cave above freezing." "I think you're going to freeze to death, but it's your decision." Henderson and the others left, certain they'd be digging out Olaf's frozen corpse come spring. The first extreme cold came in mid-December. Temperature dropped to 28 below zero overnight. Olaf spent the evening in his snow cave, burning a small fire for about an hour, then letting it die to coals. He monitored the interior temperature with a thermometer he'd brought from Norway. When he extinguished the fire, interior temperature was 62 degrees. He sealed the ventilation hole with its snow plug, lay down on his platform wrapped in furs, and slept. By morning, exterior temperature was 32 below. Interior temperature had dropped to 54 degrees. Olaf had slept warm all night with no fire, no fuel consumption, just the residual heat trapped by 2 feet of snow insulation and the earth heat rising from below. He tried to share these results with Henderson. Cave stayed at 54 degrees all night, no fire. Outside was 32 below. That is 86-degree difference. 54 degrees isn't warm, that's cold. Is 86 degrees warmer than outside? And that is without fire, without any heat source except what snow insulation traps. If I burn small fire in evening, cave reaches 70 degrees, stays warm all night. 70 degrees? That's impossible. Is physics? Snow has R value, insulation value, of approximately R1 per inch. 24 inches of wall is R24. Very good insulation. Dome shape minimizes surface area for heat loss. No gaps, no drafts. Small heat input creates large temperature rise. Henderson didn't understand R values or thermal dynamics, but he understood temperatures. 70 degrees would be warmer than his cabin got even with a roaring fire. "I'd need to see it to believe it. Come visit tonight. We'll show you." That evening, Henderson crawled through the entrance tunnel, skeptical and uncomfortable with the idea of entering a snow structure. He emerged into the main chamber and stopped, shocked. It was warm. Genuinely warm. A small fire burned in the stone pit, maybe 5 or 6 pieces of wood. The walls glowed slightly with firelight filtering through translucent ice. A thermometer hanging from a cord showed 68 degrees. "How is this possible?" Henderson touched the wall. The ice was cool to the touch, but the air was warm. Snow insulation traps heat. Fire heats small space. Dome shape and entrance below floor level keep warm air trapped inside. Is very efficient system. Henderson stayed for an hour. By the time he left, interior temperature had reached 70 degrees despite the tiny fire. Outside, it was 30 below. The temperature differential was 100 degrees. "This is the warmest I've been since October," Henderson admitted. "Yeah, snow cave is best shelter for extreme cold. Uses very little fuel. Cannot collapse from snow load. Additional snow only adds insulation. Cannot burn down. Cannot be damaged by temperature extremes." Henderson crawled back out through the tunnel, his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew about shelter and cold was wrong. The Norwegian had built a perfect survival shelter from the material everyone was trying to keep out of their cabins. Word spread. Over the next weeks, curious trappers and miners visited Olaf's snow cave. All had the same reaction: disbelief, followed by realization. The snow cave was genuinely warm, warmer than any cabin in the territory, using a fraction of the firewood. January brought weather that would define the winter of 1888 as legendary. Temperature dropped to 35 below on January 10th. By January 18th, it had reached 40 below. By January 25th, It hit 42 below zero and stayed there for 10 days straight. But temperature wasn't the worst problem. Snow was the killer. Heavy, wet snow fell continuously through late January. 3 feet accumulated in 5 days. Then temperatures dropped while snow continued falling. 5 feet, 7 feet, 9 feet of accumulated snow weight pressing down on every structure in the Yukon Valley. Log cabins began failing. The roofs weren't designed for such loads. A cabin roof might handle 3 feet of snow. 9 feet, weighing several tons, exceeded what frontier construction could support. The first collapse came on January 28th at 11 p.m. The Henderson cabin, the same Henderson who'd mocked Olaf's snow cave. The roof didn't split cleanly. It buckled in the middle, cracked along the ridgeline, then imploded inward. Henderson, his wife, and 2 children were sleeping when 12 tons of logs, snow, and ice crashed down on them. They survived by miracle. Henderson's sleeping position happened to create a small pocket that wasn't crushed. They dug themselves out, grabbed what they could, and ran through the night to Olaf's snow cave. Olaf heard them shouting outside. "Come in! Come in!" he called. They crawled through the entrance tunnel, 4 people coated in snow, shaking from cold and shock. Inside, the cave was 70 degrees. The small fire had been burning for an hour. The Henderson family stood in the center of the dome, dripping snow, unable to process what they were feeling. "Our roof collapsed," Henderson said numbly. "Everything's destroyed. We almost died." "Yeah, I hear the crash. Snow load is too much for flat roof cabin. But here, snow load makes cave stronger. More snow means more insulation." Mrs. Henderson was crying. "This cave, it's made of snow. How is it this warm? 2 feet of snow insulation, dome shape for strength, small fire for heat. Body heat from all of us also helps. Is very efficient." The Hendersons stayed. There was nowhere else to go. 2 nights later, the Morrison cabin collapsed at 3 a.m. They escaped and joined Olaf's cave. Then the Williams cabin failed. Then 3 more in one horrific night when the snow load reached its maximum. 11 feet of accumulation pressing down on structures built for 3 or 4 feet at most. By February 5th, 9 cabins had collapsed completely. 4 more were so damaged they were uninhabitable. 13 people were dead, some crushed in collapses, others who'd frozen trying to reach help through impossible snow, others who'd made it to damaged cabins only to freeze because fires couldn't keep failing structures warm. Olaf's snow cave held 17 people at peak occupancy. It was crowded, horribly crowded, but it was warm. The body heat from 17 people, plus 1 small fire burned twice daily, kept interior temperature between 65 and 75 degrees. The cave showed no damage. The 9 feet of snow on top had simply merged with the dome structure, adding insulation. The dome shape distributed the enormous weight evenly, making the structure stronger rather than weaker. The extreme conditions lasted through mid-February. The survivors crammed into Olaf's snow cave lived in conditions that would have been unbearable anywhere else. 17 people in a space designed for 2 or 3, but they lived. They stayed warm. They survived while cabins around them failed and people in those cabins died. The temperature measurements were documented obsessively. Survivors had nothing else to do but monitor their environment. On February 8th, when exterior temperature was 42 below zero and snow depth exceeded 11 feet, interior cave temperature 73 degrees with 17 people plus small fire. Henderson's collapsed cabin, estimated 15 degrees interior, no fire possible. Morrison's collapsed cabin, same as exterior, 42 degrees, a temperature differential of 115 degrees between the snow cave and the destroyed cabins. Not theoretical, not estimated, measured by multiple thermometers, witnessed by 17 people who'd thought snow caves were suicide just weeks earlier. When the weather finally broke in late February, survivors emerged to assess the devastation. 9 cabins totally destroyed, 4 more severely damaged, 13 dead. Nearly every survivor had lost their shelter, their supplies, everything they owned. Olaf's snow cave stood perfect. The structure that everyone had mocked as ridiculous had saved 17 lives. The shelter built from frozen water had proven superior to every cabin built from logs and nails, and all the materials civilized people considered proper. Tom Henderson organized what was left of the community. 38 survivors out of 51 people who'd been in the valley in January. They gathered in the largest damaged cabin that was still partially standing. 9 cabins collapsed, 13 14 people dead, 38 survivors. 17 of us survived because Olaf let us crowd into his snow cave. The cave we all called ridiculous. The cave we said would collapse and bury him. The cave made from the snow that destroyed our cabins. He turned to Olaf. You tried to tell us. You explained the physics. We laughed at you. I'm sorry. And I'm asking, will you teach us to build these? Over the following weeks, Olaf taught snow cave construction to every survivor willing to learn. The technique was specific. Step 1, site selection, slight slope for drainage, wind protection, adequate snow depth, minimum 8 feet of consolidated snowpack. Step 2, snow assessment, test snow consistency. Must be compacted enough to hold shape when cut, not so icy, it won't bond. Temperature must be below 15 degrees for best results. Step 3, foundation, stomp down base area, compact thoroughly, create firm platform for building. Step 4, block cutting, cut blocks from consolidated snow. Size, approximately 18x12x height. Transport to building site carefully, blocks can fracture. Step 5, spiral construction. Lay first course in circle. Begin inward, lean immediately. Build in continuous spiral, increasing lean gradually. Trim blocks to maintain smooth curve. Each block bonds to neighbors through pressure and cold. Step 6, dome completion. Place keystone block at apex. Must be slightly oversized to wedge in place. Seal any gaps with soft snow pressed into joints. Step 7, interior glazing. Light small fire to warm interior just above freezing. Allow interior surface to melt slightly. Extinguish fire. Ventilate. Allow melted layer to refreeze as ice. Repeat 2 to 3 times to create smooth ice glaze. Step 8, entrance tunnel. Excavate tunnel from outside, angling upward slightly, opening below main floor level. Keep tunnel narrow, easier to block cold air. Step 9, interior platforms. Build raised sleeping platform from snow blocks. Create fire pit with stone lining if stones available. Step 10, ventilation. Cut 4-inch hole at apex. Create removable plug from snow block. The survivors built 14 snow caves before the end of winter. Everyone performed as Olaf had promised. Interior temperatures 65 to 70 degrees with minimal fire. No structural issues despite continued snow accumulation, perfect stability through temperature fluctuations. The technique spread beyond the immediate valley. By 1890, snow caves were recognized as legitimate survival shelters throughout the Yukon and Alaska. Miners, trappers, and indigenous people shared knowledge. The design evolved slightly. Some made them larger, others added multiple chambers, but the core principles remained. Modern thermal analysis explains exactly why Olaf's snow cave worked so dramatically well. Snow as insulation. Compacted snow has an R value, thermal resistance, of approximately R1 per inch. Olaf's 24-inch walls provided R24 insulation, better than most modern home walls. The dome shape minimized surface area relative to volume, reducing heat loss. Air sealing. Unlike cabins with gaps at joints, doors, windows, the snow cave was perfectly sealed. No air infiltration meant no convective heat loss, the primary heat loss mechanism in frontier cabins. Thermal mass. The snow and ice structure had significant thermal mass. Once warmed, it released heat slowly, stabilizing interior temperature. Shape efficiency. The dome shape distributed structural loads evenly, allowing the structure to support enormous snow weight that would crush flat roofs. Additional snow added insulation rather than creating structural problems. Entrance design. The below-floor level entrance created a cold trap. Dense cold air flowed down and out while warm air stayed trapped above. Natural circulation that required no doors or seals. Moisture management. The interior ice glaze prevented warm air from sublimating the snow structure while blocking moisture infiltration. The efficiency was measurable, maintaining 70 degrees interior temperature when exterior was 42 degrees required approximately 5,000 BTUs per hour of heat input. A cabin maintaining the same temperature differential required 30,000 40,000 BTUs per hour due to air leakage, poor insulation, and inefficient shape. Olaf's fuel consumption was 1/6 to 1/8 of cabin requirements. Olaf Bjornsson survived the winter of 1888 and continued living in the Yukon until 1903. He built snow caves every winter, teaching the technique to anyone interested. His original 1887 cave, rebuilt annually, sheltered dozens of people over the years. The winter of 1888 became known as the Cabin Collapse Winter in Yukon history. Official records documented 9 structural failures and 13 deaths in a single valley, catastrophic mortality rate of nearly 25%. The survivors' accounts consistently credited Olaf's snow cave with saving the 17 who sheltered there. Tom Henderson rebuilt in the spring of 1888, but he also built a snow cave every autumn. In his 1902 memoir, he wrote, "I called Olaf Bjornson's snow cave the most ridiculous shelter ever built. I said he'd freeze to death sleeping in frozen water. Then my cabin collapsed and would have killed my family if we hadn't run to his ridiculous cave. That cave was 70 degrees inside, while the temperature outside killed 13 people. I learned that winter that sometimes the most ridiculous idea is the only idea that works." Modern survival training in Arctic regions includes snow cave construction as essential knowledge. The US military trains soldiers in the technique. Mountaineers and winter campers use variations. The principles Olaf demonstrated in 1887, that snow properly shaped provides superior insulation and shelter, are now established science. Everyone mocked Olaf Bjornson's ridiculous snow cave. They said it would collapse and bury him. They said snow was cold and he'd freeze sleeping in frozen water. They said you can't live in the material that's trying to kill you. They knew log cabins were proper shelter and snow caves were suicide. Then 42 below arrived with 11 feet of snow. The snow cave hit 70 degrees. 9 log cabins collapsed and killed people. The material everyone was fighting against, snow, became the only material that worked when properly understood. The ridiculous became survival. The suicide shelter saved 17 lives, and the Norwegian everyone mocked proved that sometimes you don't fight winter, you build with it.